Hello, and welcome to the Common Weal Policy Podcast. I'm Craig DL. I'm the Head of Policy and Research at Common Weal. Do you ever get the feeling that you work too much? That you spend your life out with work, just crashed out over the weekend, barely recovering until you go back in on Monday? Ever wonder what happened to that promise that automation and productivity and efficiency would let you do the same amount of work in less time, and that this would mean more time for you, not just more profits for your boss? The fight for workers' rights has long been tied up with right to work less. The concept of the weekend, with a 5.5-day working week, started in Britain in the late 19th century. The infamous Battle of George Square in Glasgow in 1919 was based around a labour dispute that included a demand to reduce the working week from 47 to 40 hours. The modern 5-day week rose out of trade union demands and pressures from socialist uprisings in the 1920s. A century on from that, a movement has started to grow up around the idea of a 4-day week. And this is one that Common Weal is personally very familiar with, as this is the working model we follow. I'm quite protective of my Fridays off now. The UK recently undertook a pilot study into the effect of a 4-day week, with participants dropping a day of work without compressing their working hours or losing income. My guest this week is Joe Ryle, director of the 4-day week campaign, who coordinated the pilot and produced the final report, which we shall discuss today. Welcome, Joe. Good to have you on the show.
Welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Just to start us off, how did you become interested in and then involved with the campaign for a 4-day week?
So on a personal level, I've been someone, who'd worked, I was working in politics, and it was, 5 days a week, 6 days a week sometimes, for a number of years. It must have been at least 7 or 8 years. And often working in roles that I was kind of really excited about. I was lucky enough to work under Jeremy Corbyn, the Jeremy Corbyn leadership, and work for John McDonnell, who was Shadow Chancellor. And they were jobs that I really enjoyed and believed in. But I just, with any kind of all full-time jobs I've done in my life, including those ones, I was just struck by how there was just such a lack of work-life balance, and how sort of defined my life was by work. Particularly, I guess, at the time of the kind of Jeremy Corbyn era. I felt like on a personal level, I lost my sense of self-identity outside of work, and sort of lost track of who I was in the other bits of me, the other sides of me, which are arguably more important, our kind of personal lives outside of work. And I'd seen in that during the kind of Jeremy Corbyn, I'd seen this kind of 4-day week campaign had started up, and it wasn't getting that much traction, but was sort of being talked about a bit. And then the Labour leadership backed a kind of 4-day working week in the 2019 general election. I think that was the first time the idea was properly put on the map, if you like. But yeah, after that kind of disappointing election result, I just thought, actually, that policy, I think it has got legs. I do think there's wider interest in it beyond the kind of Jeremy Corbyn era. And I thought it would be a shame to see that lost. I really did think, it was something that the majority of the country kind of believe in, whether you're left, right or centre. I do think it's a policy which enjoys wide support. I think people want to work less, people, they believe in their work and they think their work's important, but I think they would like a 4-day week, and the polling does show that. And so, yeah, that was how I got involved. I joined the group. And obviously the COVID pandemic has been a real catalyst for totally rethinking the world of work, but, ideas like a 4-day working week. And yeah, as I've been working on the campaign for about 2.5 years now, and we're registered now as a not-for-profit company. We've got a couple of staff, and yeah, starting to try and build up the resource of the campaign to meet the demands of a growing movement.
I've worked a 4-day week since 2017, so before the pandemic, but the big change for me was working from home, which changed the boundaries between work, but also eliminated my commute, which has been a big change in the amount of time I spend at work, because commuting is time spent, not at home, not doing personal stuff.
Well, yeah, it's unpaid time, isn't it, commuting? And I think that's it. I think remote working, more flexible ways of working, different experiments of working since the COVID pandemic, I think have given people a real taste of more freedom, more autonomy at work. And I think people want more of that. And And it, you know, a lot of this is about actually reclaiming our time. If you think about the last couple of decades, all the productivity gains we've seen since then. I mean, take the smartphone, for example, you know, that does allow us lots of types of work to be a lot more efficient and productive than we were before. But yet we're still working relatively the same amount of hours. And, you know, none of those productivity gains have really been passed on to workers in terms of more free time. But where they have been passed on is to kind of, you know, company bosses, more profits. And so this is really about reclaiming back our time. And yeah, it's an exciting time for the campaign.
I mentioned it briefly in the intro, but can you tell us in terms of formal definition, what is a 4-day week and how does it differ from merely working part-time?
Yeah, it's an important question. Whenever I give talks about a 4-day week, I always start with this because it does get confused. So just to be absolutely clear, what we mean by a 4-day week is a 4-day, 32-hour working week or less, with no loss of pay. And so the reduction in hours is key. You know, it's about reducing hours from, you know, the average working week is still somewhere between kind of 37 to 40 hours in the UK. And so it's about reducing hours. And yeah, it builds off the back of, I think as you were saying in your introduction, you know, it builds off the back of what was a campaign in the 1930s and 40s for a 5-day week. You know, we used to work a 6-day working week, and it was, you know, almost 100 years ago that we won the weekend. There was no concept of the weekend until, you know, the end of the 19th century. And so building on that 100 years later, you know, obviously the world of work's completely transformed since then. You know, we think that working hours should change soon. We think we're actually long overdue an update.
Can you tell us about the pilot, how it was structured and how it came about?
Yeah, so we put the call out at the beginning of 2022. It was January last year, that we were going to be running this program. I think we had a story in The Guardian, and we're quite quickly inundated with about 500, 600 companies registering their interest. And, you know, we hadn't really planned for that, to be honest. We were thinking sort of 20 or 30 companies might sign up and we'll go from there. So it was quite daunting at first. And in the end, we went with about 60 companies that were kind of ready to go. In June last year, because it was a 6-month trial running from June to December, and picked a mix of companies as well from across different sectors of the economy. So we wanted to show, you know, there is different ways of doing it. You know, it's not just a kind of conventional office spaces where, you know, everyone has Friday off. There's going to be different ways of doing it. So it's a real mix. You know, we had fish and chip shop taking part, a brewery, you know, sectors such as the construction and manufacturing represented, and the kind of uniting factor was that they all reduced their hours, while maintaining pay. But, you know, as I say, some of them did it slightly differently. So for some, it was kind of rotation of days off, with some staff rotating between Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays off. And that's just in recognition of the fact that, you know, these companies are moving to a 4-day week in a society which is still very dominated by the 5-day week, sadly. But I do think that's beginning to change.
Can you dig into that a bit more? Because as I say, I don't work Fridays. I think it's the same for yourself. What was this the most common way of operating for the participants, that they just had a 3-day weekend now, or did they have different days off, or how did it work?
Yeah, that was the most common. The most common was that, you know, where possible, you know, you kind of shut operations on a Friday and everyone takes Friday off, and you get that 3-day weekend. Because anecdotally, you know, it does seem something transformational about having that 3 days off in a row and that 3-day weekend. And I think everyone feels that, you know, when they have a bank holiday, you know, you always get so much excitement, you know, around the UK. We actually have the fewest number of bank holidays in Europe, but when we do get bank holidays, you know, you see that excitement. I think that's partly because people really feel the benefits of it, 3 days off in a row. And so that is the most popular way of doing it. But for other companies, you know, fish and chip shop, brewery, others, you know, they wanted to maintain the 5-day coverage. You know, if you're in a factory and you've got a production line, you know, they didn't think they could afford to shut operations on a Friday. So they were quite smart and strategic about their rota and shift patterns to ensure the kind of coverage, and also while thinking about ways in which productivity could be improved at each organisation to make the transition easier, and managed to achieve it. You know, all these of the 61 companies that took part, 92%, you know, almost every company has decided to continue with the 4-day week at the end of it. So I'm sure we can get into some of the details of the results in a minute, but overwhelmingly positive results.
And did you did you find from a company point of view, a lot of them did completely shut down rather than just operate with fewer staff for a day?
Yeah, where possible, most companies did, shut down on a Friday. And Friday is by far the most popular day off with employees.
Do you think that, I mean, as you say, we're kind of dominated by this 5-day week, and we have a lot of companies that do operate through the weekend. Obviously, a lot of service companies servicing the people who are wanting to do something other than work. Did you find that any of them in the study, and did you find them maybe shutting down midweek instead?
It was a real mix. I can't think of any specific ones. Companies with production lines and kind of service industries, they were more keen to try and keep operations open for as as they currently had it, but while giving staff a kind of 4-day rota. That did present challenges, and particularly the first month or two, there were definitely some bumps in the road, but I think by the end of it, it did show that workers can adjust quite quickly when they need to. And I think we saw that during the pandemic, this kind of move to remote working wasn't completely smooth immediately, but there's, a period of adjustment and you kind of get used to it. And I just do think this pilot shows what's possible, when we do embrace change. And there was a real kind of good spirit from all the companies involved. Lots of them reporting that kind of, employees, it brought them together much, much nicer, and there was a real kind of team spirit to make it work.
Before I came into politics, I worked in manufacturing. I used to build lasers. A lot of the audience know this. And it's quite interesting that the design of the laser was often built around that 5-day week process. It was a 5-day build for an average worker. Some of us could work a bit faster. Some of us would have a more difficult time with systems that constantly resisted you. Old traumas coming back. Let's not dive into them in this episode. So I can see there might be challenges for production companies, manufacturing companies who have that maybe a stricter timetable. Did any of the other companies face challenges that others didn't in adapting to a 4-day week?
The interesting thing was that the companies that were much older, so the ones that had existed for sort of 20, 30 years or more, they struggled more than the kind of newer organizations, which I thought was quite interesting. And I think it does show that when we're kind of set in our ways of working, kind of set with older patterns and habits, it can be harder to adapt because, some of the more fresh, more dynamic, newer companies, they kind of embrace and adapt to change much easier. And I thought that was interesting, which, kind of highlights the arguments we're trying to make about, this 9 to 5, 5-day working week is like, why are we wedded to it? Just because it's been the normal way of working for such a long time, it doesn't mean it's the right way of working. It doesn't even mean it's a very effective way of working for businesses. And, I think it is starting to shift.
So let's just dive into the study itself. Can you take us through the results?
Yeah, of course. So I'll start with the well-being side of things and the kind of employee side. So really, really, really brilliant results for well-being. Really kind of overwhelmingly positive. There was a 70% reduction in burnout over the 6-month trial period. Improvements in mental health, physical health, and also sleep, people sleeping better, which I think is associated with those positive kind of physical and mental health benefits. What else did we see? I thought that probably the most important one was that employees reported a kind of life satisfaction going up, which is crucial really, because the 4-day week is really about living a more fulfilled life, and the fact that there was 1,000 employees that replied to the surveys. And just so listeners understand, the employees took part in surveys before the trial began, which was like the baseline level, 3 months in and then 6 months in. So the researchers could really track how those metrics would change over that period. And life satisfaction jumped up quite significantly. And that's so important. And also really satisfying, that for those 3,000 employees taking part, that they're enjoying their life more and more satisfied. And I think related to that, there was also evidence showing that, employees were able to kind of manage their responsibilities in their life much better. So not just kind of work responsibilities, but also social responsibilities and caring responsibilities outside work. Just sort of managing all those bits of life was much smoother and much easier for people.
No, I can definitely attest to that. Moving to a 3-day weekend is on those days when I'm in crunch mode, like just about to produce a report or we've been busy campaigning. Friday can often be the day I crash out and do absolutely nothing. Then Saturday is the day that I do all the housework and all the chores and all the other things that I didn't have time to do through the week. And then Sunday is the day that I get to do something for myself. And that's just not possible if you only have a 2-day weekend. You have a crash out on a
No.
Saturday, you scrape through some of your chores on a Sunday and you're back at work again.
Exactly. And when you think about it, we're sort of setting ourselves up to fail really under that model. It's just, there just isn't enough time for all of those parts of life. And that does come back in the kind of anecdotal evidence time and time again with people just saying, Friday was simply their life admin day. It's the day where you sort of catch up on life, whatever it is, washing your clothes or changing a light bulb or sorting out your car insurance, whatever it is that's going on for you. If you can use that Friday to catch up on those bits, and actually you're much better rested by the time you get to the weekend, so you can enjoy your weekend a bit more.
Mm. How did things look from the company side? Because one of the advertising things about the 4-day week is that one of the worries about it is, will the company lose 20% of their output by losing that working time?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention the company side. We've always said that 4-day week is a win-win for both workers and employers, and that's been shown to be true again with this pilot study. So, almost every company that took part has decided to continue with it. And the reason for that, there's a few of them. Firstly, revenue has increased, or at least been maintained. Revenue for most of the companies that took part has gone up since they started the trial. Secondly, job retention is gone up massively. So the ability to kind of retain staff, hold on to staff, and also attract new talent to the organisation has improved dramatically, which is important in this cost of living crisis when there's a really kind of acute and tight jobs market. Thirdly, sick days reduced by 65%. So all of these benefits, are saving companies money. And when staff are better rested, they do just come in feeling and performing more effective, more efficiently in their job. And so, there's been huge benefits to companies. And yeah, I'm really kind of pleased that we've got this batch of 60 companies now joining the other, there are hundreds more out there that have already done it, but this batch of 60 who are the pioneers and who are out ready and happy to kind of tell their story to the media and to people in the country.
Apologies if I'm going a little bit off the track with my next question. It struck me here. On that job retention side of things, how much of that is because of the genuine sort of change that has happened in the job, and how much of it is maybe because asking someone to move from a 4-day job to a 5-day job is a bit like asking someone to move from a 5-day to a 6-day shift? If we all go to a 4-day week, might we lose some of those bonuses?
I think that's probably right. But, there's a real, to some extent, I think that's probably right. But to, the early pioneers and the ones that do it first, they really are going to reap those benefits. And I do think we'll start to see at some point a kind of domino effect and this start to really spread. Where the kind of 4-day working week will start to become the norm. I mean, we say that we want to see a 4-day working week become the normal way of working by the end of this decade. Because if you look back at history, it did take at least a decade or two to shift from a 6-day working week to a 5-day working week. If we're talking about the entire economy, but I'm hopeful that in the near future, we are going to reach a point where it is going to be very, very hard for anyone to employ people on a kind of 9 to 5, 5-day working week contract. It's just not a desirable way of working anymore for most people. I suspect those job retention benefits will diminish slightly as more and more companies do it. But for the early pioneers doing it, it's going to really stand them out from their competitors.
Can you tell us a bit more about the working practices here? We've already said that this wasn't about compressing hours. It wasn't about taking a 40-hour shift over 5 days and then doing it over 4 days, doing 10-hour shifts instead of 8-hour shifts. Mm. So it's not that workers were working longer in less time in fewer days. Were they just working harder, faster, or just more efficiently?
That's interesting because they were specifically asked whether they'd been felt like they were working harder compared to before the trial began. And I think it was about 30% said they had felt like they were working slightly harder, but equal number, another 30% said they weren't working any harder. So, there wasn't any really strong evidence that people were working much harder. And we've always said it's about working smarter rather than working harder, because partly, you are just more efficient when you're better rested. But the other side of it, is these companies looked at their whole operations, in quite a strategic way, and looked at everything that everyone does. And when you start to think about output and kind of productivity and working more efficiently within your time, you quite quickly start to see in all different types of work, things that we do in our kind of day-to-day work that just don't really, to be honest with you, are slightly pointless, don't contribute towards the kind of output or goals of your organization. So lots of them planned a few months in advance in the kind of induction phase, ways in which they were, actually just going to cut some of the tasks out that they didn't think were that important. So that's made it a lot easier, and has meant it's not really led to people working much, much harder.
I suppose it's probably a bit easier to not have that little bunker skive off at 2 p.m. because you're too exhausted when you're not exhausted anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. And most people are, I think even already, most people, once you get to a Friday afternoon, people are down the pub by then anyway, aren't they? So it's like, it's not, in some ways, it's not a huge reduction in hours. It's just it's in some ways, it's a change of attitude as well. So
can you tell us a bit more about the companies now that and how they've gone forward now that the pilot has finished?
Yeah. So 18 of them have made the move permanent, so kind of permanent forever for staff. I can't remember the exact number, something like 36 are continuing. So they've extended their trial by at least 6 months to 12 months. With very likely that they'll kind of make it a permanent option. They want to extend for now. And there's another 5 that, there were 3 that have paused for now. They're kind of paused, and they're considering kind of going back to a 4-day week later this year. That just have paused for now. One of them's trialing a 4.5-day week, and the other one started late. So it's a bit of a mix, but vast majority continuing the 4-day week, which is what we led with in sort of the headlines and the media coverage this week. The fact that, because as I said, none of them were necessarily expected to do that. There was no pressure on them to. Yeah, we always said it's just a trial. We want to see the 6 months commitment to trialing it, and then we'll see what happens afterwards. So there was no expectation. So the fact that there were so many of them, nearly all of them, are continuing, is really, really positive.
So what has the impact of the report been now that it's been published?
It's been huge, really. We've had a day or two of kind of not just media coverage in all the UK press. And, I was really pleased that we saw positive coverage across all the kind of mainstream newspapers and mainstream media. It was, it wasn't just kind of the Guardian and others. We had positive stories in the Telegraph about the companies making more money. We had positive stories in the Times, the Sun, the Daily Mail. So it's been really, really positive. And also it seems to have reached international audiences as well, CNN and, national newspapers in Bangkok, in Australia and India. So really is, rippling out beyond the UK. And I think that's because there is talk about 4-day working weeks in other countries too. It's not just here. It does seem to be part of a much wider international conversation. And, as I said before, this pilot does build off, evidence we've already seen in terms of the Iceland government, moving towards a shorter working week, big trials in Australia, New Zealand, America. So hopefully, this is going to be start of a much bigger conversation, not just, in the UK, but across the globe. Because it was, it was in that way that the kind of 9 to 5-day working week, the weekend became normal. We did sort of spread out, America were one of the first countries, and Spain, I think, in Europe, and it did kind of ripple out. And it's kind of, when you think about all the different countries and different types of work, it's kind of fascinating that for nearly every country in the world is still kind of wedded to this version of a 9 to 5-day working week with a weekend. So hopefully that starts to change in one country. Maybe it will start to change in others too.
Yeah, and it is strange that of all the units that we use to measure time, it's the concept of the week is possibly the one that's the most arbitrary, or at least the one that's not linked to the rotation of the Earth or the Earth's orbit or the seasons. It's more or less chosen by the limits of human endurance.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's completely made up, it's completely made up as a construct. And, I think one way in which the conversation has changed as the pandemic is there seems to be a conversation about kind of getting the work done. It's like, rather than that sort of bums on seats mentality where, you want to be seen as the last one in the office just because you're showing your commitment. Actually, I think the conversation is one of moving to kind of getting the work you need to do done in a shorter time as possible so you can enjoy the rest of your life. And, quite quickly when you start to think like that, you start to think, well, does it really matter at all how many days of the week we work or how many hours I work? As long as I get the work done, that could be a 3-day week in the future, but one step at a time.
I was going to ask that actually. Where are we? Could we see a 3-day week at one point?
You know what? I in terms of shifting the political goalposts, I would love it if someone did set up the 3-day week campaign, because as soon as we have a 3-day week campaign, then we start to look quite tame and not so radical. So if someone wants to set up the 3-day week campaign, they're listening to this, then please do. Of
course, that phrase has some fairly negative connotations in political Britain, but that's a topic for another podcast. So what's next for the 4-day week campaign?
So we want to, build off the back of these results to really kind of push on. We've just launched a national rollout program, which is aiming to, get another batch of companies to kind of roll this out in the private sector. So we're calling for a national rollout across the private sector this year. On a kind of government level, political level, we do think there is a role for government to play in this. We do think if we're talking about a 4-day working week becoming the norm, there has to be government involvement, and there's a number of policies they could implement now and in the future to make this a reality. So firstly, we're calling for, at the very least, giving workers the right to request a 4-day, 32-hour working week with no loss of pay. At the moment, workers can't even request that. And that could easily be done just through the flexible working legislation that already exists. Secondly, we want to see, public sector trials. We do think that a 4-day working week should be for everyone, and, it is ultimately about a better work-life balance for everyone. And if you think about the economy, it is teachers, it is nurses that are some of the most burnt out and overworked sectors, and it's not producing good results either. So we do want to see more public sector trials, and there's nothing stopping the governments from getting on with that. And lastly, we do in the longer term do want to see legislation that would, legislate for a maximum 32-hour working week. And you'd have to have a transition to get there. It's not something that could be implemented overnight, but we do think over a course of a parliament or something like that, with the kind of everyone working together, business leaders, government, trade union leaders, we do think over something like 5 years of parliament, you could get there. And finally, and I think this is important too, we do want to see more involvement from the trade union movement in this. We do really think this is especially if you look at the history of it, it was the trade unions that won us the weekend in the first place. And while most of them do support a 4-day week, they have been quieter than we would like. And we would like to see them kind of leading from the front on this. And I do totally understand they've had, COVID pandemic and job losses to fight, and now the inflation and cost of living crisis, and they're fighting for better pay. But I do think, I do really think in terms of an issue that could make the trade union movement seem modern, seem relevant in the modern era, and remind people that, that some of the rights that we have won because of the trade unions in terms of the weekend, maternity pay, all the rest of it. I do think the trade union should be more involved in this, and organising with workers in their workplaces to demand a 4-day week is going to be crucial.
So how can people read the report or find out more or get involved with the campaign?
Yeah. So if you go to the Autonomy website, Autonomy are the think tank that led on this. I also work for them 1 day a week. I'm their media and comms lead. You can find the report. I would recommend reading through it. It's a good read. There's lots of case studies in there and lots of interviews that took place with staff alongside the kind of hard data. So I would recommend that. And if you're at an organisation that hasn't moved to a 4-day week yet, then, start having that conversation with your colleagues. See what level of interest there is, and take that proposal forward to management, and you can make that pitch on the basis that this isn't about workers being lazy. This is about claiming back our time, but in a way that allows businesses and organizations to work just as well as they have done before. And, this is about maintaining productivity, but living better lives. And so, please do get involved in that. We can support you in that as well.
And I will, of course, link to the report and some more information in the description of the podcast. Well, thank you, Joe. This has been a great chat. I'm really, really pleased to have caught you on a very busy week for yourself. So I really appreciate the time you've taken to come on and talk about this.
That's okay. Thanks for having us. Thank you.
And from one 4-day weeker to another, we're recording this on a Thursday afternoon. So happy weekend tomorrow.
Thank you. I'm definitely off tomorrow.
And I'd just like to finish the show, as I always do, by reminding folk that Common Weal as an organisation is entirely funded by our donors and supporters. We don't have government money, we don't get corporate sponsors, we don't even have adverts on our website. So if you want to help us produce the policies we produce, to help us campaign on them, and to help produce this podcast, then there's a donate button in the description, and we are very grateful for anything we receive through that. Thank you to my guest. Thank you to all of you for listening to the podcast, and please come back next week.